Welcome to the Mindset Game podcast. I am so deeply grateful to introduce our special guest today, Pete Walsh. Pete is a master level family business and leadership coach, as well as being a published author of 2 books with over 20 years of experience coaching hundreds of families all over the world to achieve an even higher level of success and fulfillment. Now, on a personal note, Pete is one of the reasons that I sit here today with you. It is the reason that I'm a coach and that I do what I do, because Pete is one of my teachers. He trained me just about 10 years ago in the very first professional coaching class that I took. And it is thanks to you, Pete, for your inspiration, your incredible guidance and love that I sit here today. So I'm deeply grateful. Thank you.
Thank you for that acknowledgement, and it's a pleasure to be here. It's an honor to be here.
Thank you. Welcome. So we like to kick things off on this podcast by asking you, how did you get into this work, doing the amazing things that you do with families?
Well, thank you. It's a great story. I love to tell. My life's dream was to run our family's business. We had a 90-year-old business here in Arizona with 300 employees. And I went to college. I got a degree in business. I went into the family business and I worked there for 16 years, climbing my way up the corporate ladder, as it were. And yet, I wasn't fulfilled. I wasn't happy. My uncle and I had some very significant differences in certain values. And I was thinking about prepping for this session, that there were a lot of values that we were good on, but there were some really important ones to me that we weren't good on. And I was really dissatisfied. And I had reached my late 30s. I had lost 2 brothers and 2 best friends by then in my life, 2 guys that stood up for me in my wedding. And so I had decided life was short. And I was at church, and the sermon was about finding your special gift. And I prayed in that moment and said, help me find what mine is, because I know I can hit a home run for you. Those were my exact words. And 3 days later, a friend of mine, we were at lunch. She owned a construction company. And she said, oh, our coach said this. And I said, your coach? What's that? And she said, somebody that helps us develop our plans and hold us accountable. And I said, you're kidding. That's a job? Oh my gosh, tell me more about it. What I didn't understand or realize at the time, Vered, was I was a coaching leader. I was pulling all of my troops together, and we were rehearsing and talking about how we could get better. And I was really a coach already. I just didn't know it was a profession. So I came home and told Karen, I said, I know what I'm supposed to do. She said, what? And I said, I'm supposed to be a coach. And she said, are you kidding me? What are you talking about? And my life turned on a dime. I hired a coach. I loved the work that we did. And I eventually went back to my family business and all of our employees. And I said, I'm going to go be a coach. And they said, you're kidding. What? Are you crazy? I mean, this is your life here to do this work. But I went out and started my coaching business and started coaching leaders all over the country. And then some family advisors came to me and said, you should really work with family businesses because of your background. And I said, no, I don't want to do that. That's really messy work. I knew what that felt like. I didn't want to do that. And they said, come work with us with a couple families. And I went and worked with them. And all of a sudden, another light bulb went on. I was like, oh my goodness. So one of the stories I like to tell, and we'll weave into all of this, is that my dream was to impact my family business. And the person upstairs had a bigger vision for me. And now I get to impact family businesses all over the world. So I work with many multi-generational families and in leadership and communication, intentions, all the things that you and I work on and practice. And so now, and we sold our family business 10 years later to Target Corporation. And it really worked out beautifully. Everything worked out the way it's supposed to work out. And so that's how I got into coaching. And then subsequently was one of the founders of the local coaching chapter, then got into teaching coaching, which is where I met you, and then got coaching from you a couple of years ago that was hugely impactful, that is still alive every day in me, the things that I do. And I'll hopefully get to talk a little bit about that. So I just absolutely love the field of coaching and personal development. And I'm just honored to be here and talk about some of the things you and I love to talk about.
Oh, well, once again, thank you for sharing that, and thank you for taking the time to be with us today, because there are many individuals listening right now that are either in a family business and maybe are experiencing some conflict, or wondering, should I be here or do something different, or maybe deciding, should we sell the business or stay with it or grow it. And there's a lot of uncertainty and distress, and maybe sometimes there's even interpersonal conflict going on between the different generations. And so what would you kind of say to those individuals that are in a family business but are experiencing some distress?
So, what I would tell anybody that's in all those situations is figure out what you want. And you talk a lot about this. First and foremost, try to clear the fog and say, hey, this is what I want. And that's my process I went through in my family business. I want autonomy. I want to be able to do what I want to do the way I want to do it. I want to be able to make a substantial living, to provide for my family and create a lifestyle that I want. I want to have simplicity. I want to have nurturing, wonderful relationships. So, and those are probably all some of the similar things that I say to Karen, my wife of 34 years. We've had some very, I won't say difficult, but some real heartfelt conversations. And I kind of thought to myself, I tapped myself on the shoulder. I was like, oh, okay, Mr. Coach, here we are 34 years into it, and we're still, our life has evolved. The kids are gone. We're getting closer to retirement. What do you want today? What Karen wants today, or what I want today, is probably different than the 25-year-old version of Pete wanted. So if you can keep learning to define what you want and clearly communicate that with a warm heart to these other people you're in a relationship with, then that's the beginning of trying to figure out whether you are supposed to be together or whether you can make it work and all of that. And so I think that's the first thing, is you figure out what you want, tell me what you want, and then I can figure out if I can help you get that. And, for Karen and I, there was a gentleman that I coached me many years ago, and he said, be of service. And so with Karen, I try to say, what do you want? And how can I help you get that? And see, probably one of the fundamental breakdowns for my uncle and I was he loved me and he was a good man, but I'm not sure he was committed to helping me get what I wanted. And, I don't hold him any harm for that. But it was important for me to say, this is what I want. And I'm 36 years old, and I'm going to work now for another 25 or 30 years. So I should be someplace where I'm working towards what I want. Does that make sense?
It does. And it really highlights the power of intention, and
Mm-hmm.
how important it is to align with our top values and
Mm-hmm.
to speak our truth, to express that with compassion. And also, the flip side of the coin is to ask others what's important to them and to do what we can to honor that. Yes. So, what do you do when there's a values conflict?
One of my favorite teachers and one of the most important work that I've done also is a gentleman named Robert Keegan. And his book is How the Way We Talk Can Change the Way We Work. And his concept in there is competing commitments. So what you're getting at is we all have competing commitments. I have a commitment to have freedom and flexibility, but I also have a commitment to have a safe home and financial security. So that makes me, I have to work a little bit. And so I think it's like sorting those out and then learning how to prioritize them, and then maybe learning, some other thing, Vera, that I've done the last couple of years that I think so good is all of life is a negotiation. And so there's a book called Never Split the Difference by a guy named Chris Voss that has been very, very popular lately. And so I don't know about your marriage. I said that with a little bit of tongue in cheek, but it's like a negotiation. It's like, you know what? Here's what I'd like. What would you like? Could we find a way? And so you could imagine then in a family business how dynamic that can become with roles and responsibilities and financial concerns and autonomy. And this is the same thing in my marriage and your friendship. So it's like, here's what I would like. What would you like? Okay, could we find a way to work that out together? Could we be creative? Could we be, thoughtful? And could we experiment and find ways to do that? So I think everybody has to know that they have competing commitments and they have to find a way to navigate through those and balance that. And because that was in our coaching work we did together, this idea of reflective practitioner. So we think about what we're going to do, then we go and we perform, and then we come back and we say, hey, how did we do? How did that go? And, Karen and I will do that. And I'll say, hey, how did that go for you when we had all those people over this weekend? Or my daughter, Laura, who does some stand-up comedy and just a wonderful, wonderful young lady. One point, we were in the minivan. I can still picture it to this day. And she said, Dad, is this lecture available on audio cassette? I mean, that kind of dates the timing, but I want to, with all the people in my life, my friend, my wife, my clients, to keep saying, how was that? How did that go? How did we do? What could we do different? So one thing that you and I share is this love for learning and this idea of deliberate practice. So I think it's just so important to identify certain things that you're going to do on a regular basis. There's a gentleman that did 20-year research project, and he found that the people that were the very best at what they do practice different than other people. They don't necessarily have more knowledge or skills, but they practice. And so I want to just highlight an example that you gave me a couple of years ago when you were coaching me. So now every night, right before I fall asleep, I'd say, how did we do today? And which is kind of a reflection. And then first thing in the morning when I'm barely awake, I start to pray and I start to dream about my most important aspirations. Those are deliberate practices. And then the other thing I wanted to squeeze in, if we could, is another thing that you and I have in common is something called mind movies. So I'm very much into mindfulness, meditation, but my son, William, gave me the idea of mind movies a few years ago. So I made a handful of mind movies. And then I worked with your daughter, Maya, on making another mind movie. So literally every morning, the first thing I do is I watch these 6 movies that are a 3-dimensional vision of what I'm trying to create. And so, of all things, so but that's like setting the tone for the day. That's like tuning in. So I think those are some things that you can do is really identify your competing commitments, do some deliberate practice toward those, and really do it every day, as you know.
Yeah, I thank you for sharing that. And it's so important what you're sharing because many of us go straight to the tactics. What specifically do I say? What do I do to resolve this conflict, whether it is in a family business environment or in any environment? And the truth is that it starts from within. It starts from clarifying what is most important to me, prioritizing that, and really giving the most focus and, as you said, deliberate practice to those things that are at the top of the list right now, which might be different than what will be on the list 20 years from now. And really tuning into that. And having practices like visualizing that or watching a mind movie, right? Maya's company, if I may plug it a little bit here, is Infinity Mind Movies. And she what she does is that, as you said, it's giving people an opportunity to experience their future, to prepare their body and their mind in advance of the future events, so they can feel more ease and adapt easily to take the actions that they need to
Mhm.
achieve those goals. So would you be willing to share, Pete, what are, let's say, the top 3 issues that people hire you the most for, kind of to help them solve? What are the biggest conflicts, issues that people need help with in a family business environment?
It's a really good question. I would say, first and foremost, personality differences. So, again, some of us are visionaries, some of us are implementers, some people are practical, some people. So, that is kind of a first thing, is just understand it. Again, that was a big part of my journey with my uncle. He was a very conservative, detail oriented guy, and I was more of a visionary. And so, like, if I said to you, you are the detail oriented person, I said, Vered, we're going to get in a car and go on a super vacation, and don't worry about it. It's going to be great. You would say to me, well, how much gas are we going to need? Where are we going to stop? Is there a reservation, a hotel? And I said, just get in the car. Let's just go. It'll be fun. And he couldn't do it. It was just like, so style differences. And there's a lot of assessments out there that will help you get clear about your, behavioral style, if you will. And then I guess the other thing is vision, just what we're talking about. What do you really want? And what do I want? And can we come up with a shared vision where we can all get what we want? What if we as a country could realize, as a world could realize, there's plenty for everybody? What do you want? And what do I want? And why don't we focus on seeing what we could all work on together with some commonality, instead of getting caught in our differences or fighting each other or tearing each other down? And so I think, and as a family, that we have to have a common vision. And so differences in personality, common vision, and then to learn to communicate and work with each other. Because you know this from the work that you do, we get emotionally hijacked. I have this mindful version of Pete, and then Karen says something, and I just get hijacked, and it's like, and then if I don't practice, and truthfully, I rehearse that. I will think, like, if Karen's going to say X, what are you going to do? Are you going to, get hijacked and say something you regret, or are you going to take a breath, a really important deliberate practice, and say, wow, tell me more about that? So just learning to get along. People get so caught up in it should be their way. Conflict occurs, they handle it poorly. So maybe that third piece is effective conflict resolution skills. I mean, you got to learn to embrace the conflict, explore it, work with it. And when you can, I think you can end up with a much more rich and deep and even more meaningful relationship. So I think those are some things to work on, and all of that takes practice, right? I was reading your stuff again this week. The game, I just invented a board game for families, because when they play, they have a different mindset. So I created a board game where they can go around and say, like, what went well and didn't go well, and what could even be better, and give me one bit of feedback. Because when we're playing, we drop some of our other preconceived notions.
Oh my goodness. Thank you, Pete. There's so much wisdom and really beautiful little nuggets. And so someone might be hearing this and saying, I'm with you, Pete. I want to dream big. I know what I want. And, there is this conflict. As you said, maybe it's a personality or a behavioral conflict. Maybe it's a values conflict, a vision conflict, or maybe some communication conflict. But, I don't know what to do. How do I deal with this conflict? So what would you say to them?
Yeah. What do you think you should do? You know that too. You did it with me earlier, because they know what to do. They just don't sometimes have the courage or the clarity. So I would ask, what do you think you should do? What's one thing you could do? And experiment and go try it. And one of our foundational pieces in coaching is that you know what to do. My job is to help you hold the mirror up, explore, be reflective, mindfulness. I was with a young lady this morning on the East Coast, and I just said, why don't you just reflect on that one idea for the next 2 weeks and come back and tell me what you came up with? And so take some action and get some people that can help hold you accountable or give you new ideas.
So it's so cool, Pete, because everything that you're sharing is really applicable to anyone
Right.
in a family business, out of a family business, leader, parent, because it's life skills. It is how to become conscious of what is meaningful and important to us, how to become even more focused about the things that are most kind of important on the list, and how to deliberately take those actions, ask for help, stay accountable, adapt to eventually reach that goal. What advice would you give to someone who says, I want this, but I've got this belief that maybe I'm not good enough, or maybe my father, my uncle, my aunt, right, in the lens of a family business, they don't really believe I could do it. Like, I have confidence, or at least I believe I can learn it, but they don't really believe in me because when I was a kid, I did this or that. So, how does the old history play into uh, current success, if you will, in a family business?
So there are some coaches that specialize in some of those things that can help you unearth some old beliefs. I think, again, I spoke to Robert Keegan. His work was really about uncovering some beliefs. And that was just a form of reflection, of just sitting there and thinking about it and, really getting in tune with, what are you telling yourself? What comes up for you? So I would say just some deep reflection. If you believe you have some hidden beliefs, go Google and start looking at working on limiting beliefs, and you're going to find a bunch of good YouTube videos and good teachers. And then, if nothing else fails, just prove them wrong with determination. Like, nobody believed that my coaching practice. I think of most of the employees figured I'd be back a year or two later, and like, all right, gave it a try. Okay, now get back in your place there. Keep with determination and resilience. That's another thing that you talk a lot about. There's nothing that would make me happier than to prove my mother wrong, or my sibling, or those employees who, to this day, I run into some of them. They're like, oh, whatever happened to that coaching thing? I'm like, well, I've been doing it for 22 years. I coach people all over the world. And, it's like, shut the what up. So whatever gives you motivation to keep working at it. I mean, that. It's like you're polishing. I think of Michelangelo and the David. You're like removing the stone every day. You're polishing. Just keep polishing, right? And the masterpiece will emerge.
Wow, that is true, and so one of the situations that I want to ask you about is, it's a client that she is progressing to become CEO of this very large organization, to take over her father's job. And she is concerned. One of the things that she's concerned about is she doesn't have as much experience as a lot of the senior people in the organization, right? People around the leadership team. And so, what would you advise to an emerging leader in a family business that is on this accelerated path, and there's a lot of pressure, there's a lot for them to learn in a condensed period of time? When there's kind of a belief of, what if I'm not ready, or what if they perceive that I'm not ready? What would you say about that?
I'd ask her if she thinks she's ready, first of all. Secondly, this also, the evolution of leadership is your role today is to perhaps collect a good group of professionals around you and help them and get out of the way. And so her job isn't, she's not going to have more experience than these other people. Learn to be a servant leader, learn to show humility. You know this also. And by the way, there's a great article called The Tests of Princes that was in the Harvard Business Review years ago. And someone like that gets tested technically. Do you know the business? From a trust or ethics standpoint, will you make the right decision? Do you have the right vision? So someone like that is getting tested all the time. And so keep demonstrating your humility, your openness to others, your willingness to learn from others. And so I think sometimes the mistake someone can make is that, and that was the other place I was going to go, I should be just like dad. And dad's real X and Y and Z. No, be your own version of leadership. But I think, and I hope that you would agree, I think that you would agree, leaders today are facilitating, they're creating good, strong teams, they're creating a place where everybody can bring their best talent. So take a little pressure off of herself and realize you don't have to be just like dad. You're not going to do it like dad. And the other thing that you know also is it just takes time. You know, we call it the seasoning of an executive. It's like the seasoning of a frying pan. There's no way to speed it up. You know, you want to just keep allowing time and realizing some of my biggest mistakes in my business were my greatest learning opportunities. And my uncle, back to him, wonderful guy, Uncle Tim, you know, there were some big ideas I had that were like total flops and were like expensive. And he never yelled or screamed. He just said, you know, I hope you're going to figure out how to sell all that stuff you bought that you thought you were going to. So just also embrace that your mistakes are going to be how you learn, right? Yeah.
And you mentioned time and giving time, and I'm curious, what about those situations, let's say where the parent or grandparent wants to retire, yes, and so there's an expectation to take over the role, and once again in a very kind of quick time frame that doesn't allow us to integrate everything that typically we would as a leader. What would you advise to those individuals or to the parents or grandparents that want to retire to support them in that succession planning?
I forgot, I should have mentioned that earlier. Most of the time, the problem is mom and dad and grandpa don't want to leave. So just put that out there. They really don't. It's their whole identity. And they're like, someday, and that was our issue with my uncle. He's like, someday this is going to be yours. I'm like, dude, because he was a workaholic. I'm like, you're going to be 85 and I'm going to be 65. And I have those stories right now, real, where the kids are in their mid 50s and dad is in his mid 80s. And he's saying, someday you'll get to fly the plane. And so that's the more common problem. But into the accelerating, and you and I, coaching is an accelerator. I've been saying that for years. Coaching is about accelerating. I was maybe going to get to where I was, but when I spent time with you, you accelerated the process. So that's one way to accelerate the process. And with some families, I talk in metaphors and analogies. We're trying to hand over the family Learjet. It's a very expensive, it's a big asset and everybody's riding in it. And so if we give it to this person who's not ready to pilot it, it could be like a disaster, like on so many fronts. So with some families, we'll hire an interim CEO. We'll say, you know what, Vera's not quite ready, but you know what, let's go hire Mary. She's an experienced pilot. Let's have her fly for the next 4 years. You're going to sit next to her and learn from her. And then we're going to put you in the seat. That's another way to do that. So you don't want to put someone in the seat that's not ready to be in the seat when, like in our case, we had 300 employees that had been there for a long time. That would be irresponsible to say, I think she's got it. Here, take the wheel. You know, it's like, you don't want to do that. So but again, if we go back to creativity, determination, intention, prayer, you know, don't give up. keep coming up. And back to my story, I thought it was going to be X and it turned out to be Y, and Y was beautiful and so much better than X. So trust that if you put good intention, you bring a warm heart to it, it's going to work out.
So thank you, Pete. And one of the things that I see often in my coaching CEOs, business leaders, entrepreneurs, is that sometimes they have built a successful business, but for some reason it's not fulfilling anymore, or maybe there's something else that just seems a lot more exciting and fun for them. But it's either they believe that nobody can do what they do, or maybe there's a feeling of guilt, or kind of like, I don't want to betray my team. What's going to happen to my family or to my employees if I were to leave? What would you advise to those individuals that feel like something is calling them to move elsewhere, but yet there's a holding force to the business?
I'd encourage them to move elsewhere. Sometimes other people won't step up until you step out of the space. It's like a mobile over a kid's crib when that one person's the center of the universe. So I would encourage them to keep relentlessly pursuing other. And that if your heart's not completely in it, you're not doing a service to the whole organization. So take a step aside, take a sabbatical. I think a lot about leaders, and if you're creating something that's really outstanding, it doesn't rely on you, right? That's the book that I've written in the Family Business Performance Center. My dream now is that this work will live on beyond me. So if someone is feeling like they want to be called to something else and they feel they're going to betray, maybe they need to change their vision. Maybe the vision needs to be that the baby can go on without them.
Yeah. Thank you, Pete. It's really cool what you're sharing here, because you're essentially giving permission for people to follow their heart. And what about for family who they have a business, and some of the younger people or the younger generations that are kind of debating, do I go into the business or do I go do my own thing, right? So there's kind of a confusion, a lack of clarity as to what to do. What do you believe would be the next right step for them?
To explore if they have a passion for the business. You and I have a passion for this work, and that's what ignites us every day. And I really believe it's one of the key things. So to really check and say, do I have a passion for this family business that we've created? Or is there a way I could turn the business to where I could express my passion in it? That's another way to do that. But if you're not passionate about what you're doing every day, it's going to be a long road. To help them really explore what are their inherent gifts and talents and passions. Because if you're doing something you're passionate about and you have an inherent talent for it, then you're like one of the lucky people like me that gets to get up and do what I do every day because I love it and I happen to be good at it. So explore their passions and talents. Don't do something because you're afraid you're going to let other people down. I mean, I don't know if that's a way to live your life. Now, we're parents and we're caregivers for our elderly parents. I mean, there are times and places in your life where you are called to do things that you don't necessarily want to do, but it's the right thing to do. But, in many of these cases, that's not the case.
Pete, you've shared so many really wonderful, loving nuggets of wisdom. And I imagine that some of the people listening who may be struggling with some of the issues we've brought up today would like to reach out and learn more, and maybe view some of the videos, read your books. How can they learn more from you and really engage in all this wonderful content that you share?
Thank you. And thank you for letting me be with you again. It's always such a pleasure and honor, and your energy just radiates. And I know that what you're doing is making a huge impact. So thank you. Familybusinessperformance.com is the web address for the Family Business Performance Center. And peak peakcoach.com, peak like mountaintop, peakcoach.com is my executive coaching website where there's some other tools, and those would be good places to start. And my son's a filmmaker, and that was another creative way for us to work together. So we've made over 50 videos together. And I wanted to give a plug for the Family Business Playbook, which is a book that I just published that was co-authored with my grandfather, who passed away in 1969. And I had a life goal of getting to work with him. And I took some of his manuscripts and some of the things that he wrote 50 years ago and put them together with mine so he and I could create a book together. And I think it's another example of creativity and innovation to help you achieve your life's dreams. So those would be some places to look.
Once again, thank you, Pete, for your time.
Well, thank you. And I think